When people imagine narcissists, they imagine confidence. They imagine arrogance. They imagine someone who walks into a room demanding attention. Someone loud, someone obvious, someone impossible to miss. But the most dangerous narcissist is often the one nobody sees. The quiet one, the wounded one, the sensitive one, the one who never seemed powerful enough to hurt anyone. And that is exactly why they are so difficult to recognize. Because covert narcissists do not conquer through force. They conquer through sympathy. They do not demand attention. They attract it. They do not appear superior. They appear misunderstood. And the tragedy is that the people who fall in love with them are often the most compassionate people imaginable. The rescuers, the healers, the listeners, the people who see pain and instinctively move toward it. Today, we're going to talk about covert narcissism, about love bombing disguised as vulnerability, about emotional dependency disguised as intimacy, and about the silent revenge that often comes when a covert narcissist realizes they can no longer control the person they once believed belonged to them. Because what many people eventually discover is something deeply disturbing. The relationship felt like love, but the structure underneath it was never love at all. Her name was Sophie. She met Daniel when she was 29. Daniel did not sweep her off her feet. That would have been easier to identify. Instead, he made her feel uniquely understood. He listened carefully. He remembered details, seemed deeply emotional, deeply thoughtful, deeply wounded. Within weeks, Sophie knew intimate stories about his childhood, his difficult parents, his betrayals, his disappointments, his loneliness. The world had been cruel to Daniel, at least according to Daniel. And Sophie wanted to help. That was the beginning, not attraction, not passion, compassion. The covert narcissist's favorite doorway. Dark psychology identifies something fascinating about covert narcissists. Unlike grandiose narcissists who seek admiration through superiority, covert narcissists often seek admiration through victimhood. They become the person nobody understands, the person nobody appreciates, the person everyone has mistreated. And when someone finally offers compassion, they attach to that compassion with extraordinary intensity, not because they love the person, because they love what the person provides. Validation, attention, emotional supply. In the beginning, Sophie felt chosen. Daniel texted constantly. He said she was different. He said she was the first person who truly understood him. He said he had never connected with anyone this deeply. He spoke about fate, about destiny, about finally finding home. This is where many people misunderstand love bombing. Love bombing is not always extravagant gifts. It is not always dramatic romance. Sometimes it is emotional acceleration, the creation of artificial intimacy, the sensation that a relationship 6 weeks old somehow feels 6 years old, the feeling that someone sees your soul, the feeling that nobody has ever understood you the way they do. And because it feels so sincere, it is often impossible to recognize while it is happening. 6 months later, Sophie noticed something strange. The compassion only moved in one direction, toward Daniel, never toward her. Whenever Sophie struggled, Daniel found a way to become the victim. If she was exhausted, he was more exhausted. If she was stressed, he was more stressed. If she was hurt, somehow he became hurt by her hurt. Every emotional road led back to him. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Then she thought it was insecurity. Then she thought it was trauma. Eventually, she realized it was a pattern, a very deliberate pattern. Dark psychology calls this emotional monopolization. The covert narcissist cannot tolerate existing outside the emotional center of the relationship. Every crisis becomes their crisis. Every conversation becomes their conversation. Every wound somehow becomes evidence of their suffering. The spotlight never appears to be on them, yet somehow it never leaves them either. Years passed. The relationship became increasingly confusing, not abusive in obvious ways, not cruel in obvious ways. That was the problem. Everything happened quietly, subtly, indirectly. Sophie often found herself apologizing for things she did not understand, defending herself against accusations she could not fully explain, feeling guilty without knowing exactly why. The covert narcissist rarely attacks directly. Direct attacks create evidence. Instead, they specialize in implication. disappointment, withdrawal, silence, a sigh, a look, a carefully chosen sentence, a suggestion that you have somehow failed them. Not enough for you to defend yourself against, but enough for you to feel responsible. And over time, responsibility becomes guilt. Guilt becomes obligation. Obligation becomes control. This is why so many survivors struggle to explain what happened. Nothing dramatic happened, and yet everything happened. The turning point came when Sophie received a major career opportunity, a promotion, more money, more responsibility, more independence, more confidence. For the first time in years, her life no longer revolved around Daniel's emotions, and Daniel noticed immediately. At first, he seemed supportive, then distant, then strangely cold, then wounded, then resentful, but never openly, never honestly, always indirectly. Dark psychology identifies this moment as narcissistic injury, the moment a narcissist experiences another person's growth as personal abandonment, because control depends on dependency, and dependency was beginning to disappear. Sophie expected conflict. What she did not expect was silence, weeks of silence, months of emotional distance, tiny punishments, tiny rejections, tiny acts of revenge, canceled plans, forgotten anniversaries, passive-aggressive remarks, public indifference, private coldness. This is the covert narcissist's preferred weapon, silent revenge. Because open revenge risks exposure, silent revenge creates confusion, and confusion is easier to deny. The goal is not resolution. The goal is emotional destabilization. To make the other person question themselves, to make them work harder, to make them chase approval, to make them return to the position of emotional dependency they once occupied. Daniel never shouted, never threatened, never exploded, and yet Sophie felt increasingly trapped. Because psychological control does not require volume, only consistency. One evening, she asked him a simple question. "Are you angry with me?" Daniel looked surprised. He smiled gently, and he said something she would remember forever. "No, why would you think that?" That sentence destroyed her, because everything told her he was angry. Everything told her he was punishing her. Everything told her something was wrong, yet he denied all of it. And suddenly she no longer trusted her own reality. Dark psychology calls this reality erosion, not full gaslighting, something quieter, the gradual destruction of confidence in one's own perceptions. Eventually, Sophie left, not because of one event, because of 10,000 tiny events, 10,000 moments that individually seemed insignificant, yet collectively became unbearable. And when she left, something happened. Daniel transformed. The wounded victim disappeared, the quiet suffering disappeared, the gentle, misunderstood man disappeared, and underneath it was rage, cold rage, patient rage, calculated rage. The silent revenge became public. Mutual friends received carefully edited stories. Family members received selective information. Social media became a stage. Every narrative portrayed Daniel as the abandoned victim, the tragic hero, the man whose love had been rejected. And that is when Sophie finally understood. The relationship had never been about connection. It had been about ownership, not love, supply, not intimacy, control, not partnership, dependency. Because love celebrates your growth. Control fears it. Love wants your freedom. Control wants your reliance. Love feels joy when you become stronger. Control feels threatened. The hardest truth about covert narcissism is that much of it looks like love. The concern looks like love. The attention looks like love. The vulnerability looks like love. The need looks like love. The attachment looks like love. But love does not require you to shrink. Love does not punish independence. Love does not retaliate against growth. Love does not demand permanent emotional caretaking. Love does not become hostile when control disappears. If you recognize yourself in this story, I want you to remember something. The fact that you believed it was love does not make you foolish. It makes you human. Covert narcissists are successful precisely because they target the best parts of human nature: empathy, compassion, patience, hope, trust. The qualities that made you vulnerable are the same qualities that make you valuable. Do not confuse the two. Tell me something in the comments today. Have you ever realized that a relationship you called love was actually built on something else entirely? What was the moment you finally saw it? The moment when confusion became clarity? The moment when the story changed? Tell me below, because naming the pattern is often the first step toward escaping it. And sometimes the most dangerous relationships are not the ones that break your heart. They are the ones that quietly teach you to doubt your own. Subscribe for the next episode, because next week we examine a question even darker than this one. Why some people never stop watching the partners they lost, not because they love them, but because they still believe they own a part of them. I will see you then.